Coming up, the Cleveland Cavaliers were officially eliminated from the playoffs, and Brian Windhorst wants you to know that teams are ready to pursue Donovan Mitchell front of line. The Brooklyn Nets with a package in hand. We break it down, the potential other rivals after Donovan Mitchell's services, and whether or not we think the juice is worth the squeeze. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armada. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And today, Doug, yes, the playoffs roll on. We don't care. The bottom line is Donovan Mitchell, the pursuit of a star, can officially begin in earnest, as ESPN's Brian Windhorst reporting. Yes, the Brooklyn Nets, they got some things in mind in terms of trying to get Mitchell away from Cleveland.
Well, that didn't take long. I mean, the Cavs were basically, they weren't even eliminated when he originally got thrown out there. I mean, the idea was that he was just they were going to be eliminated. And I mean, they were. Cavs played without Mitchell and LeVert and Jared Allen and everybody else.
Bittersweet here a little bit, I will say on that. Because, yes, it's like, what are we in? Fourth quarter, about 7-8 minutes to go here. We go ahead. We'll drop this now. But do you find that?
I think it was even before that. I think it was even before that. Anyway,
I know. Point being,
it was like the worst kept secret in the world that all these teams are going to be vying, or there's going to be teams vying for Donovan Mitchell's services in this offseason via a trade through Cleveland. I did think it was interesting that along with the Nets, Windhorst did mention the Lakers as well as like specific teams. So like saying the teams by name is different than just there's going to be teams vying. I mean, there was no reading between the lines with the Windhorst thing. So, we've known this for a while. We've known the Nets are really interested here. They've made many sort of like behind the scenes proclamations about how they want to build the team going forward. Mitchell seems like he's going to be one of the most available guys come the off season here. And I guess we just need to like now start dissecting whether or not this is like the correct route, whether it even matters, because it's just a foregone conclusion. Like we're in a weird spot here with the Nets as they kind of think about building forward. And it's very clear that they're in a position where they could get bid up for Mitchell's services here in the offseason.
Yeah, the Lakers one is always fascinating because, of course, they're going to be on it everybody. But then what do they have to offer? You think about these packages. So we're going to get in on the Nets one first and foremost. Just what do we think that could look like? Bleacher Report put out some speculative to have some kind of comparisons between some of these teams that could be in for Donovan Mitchell. I was just saying there briefly that there's something bittersweet about, at least in my mind, that when a team and a player looks like they're going to be parting ways, that you don't get the full conclusion of their journey. Mitchell doesn't play the last couple of games in the series against Boston. We don't think that they were going to win, but with how close the last couple of games had been, you at least would like it to be, especially if you're Cleveland, and we'll talk about them on the back end. You'd like it to be, hey, look how close we came. There's still this opportunity. Instead, it's kind of like, hey, I wasn't available. Allen wasn't available. Basically, we just kind of petered out. And that's why Windhorst is like, why wait for the full conclusion of this series when I can just get the ball rolling now? Brooklyn Nets. We talk about a package. I mentioned Bleacher Report. This is not the ironclad what the Nets are going to do. But as we talk about some of the other teams here, I think it's informative when you compare what's being included. For the Brooklyn Nets, it's going to be always more asset-based, draft pick-based. For other teams, they're going to try to offer some young players, some young talent. Where do you set the threshold? If I tell you that over on Bleacher Report, they put this in as the Nets go, and by the way, perfectly phrased, go all in again, talking about potentially offering something along the lines of 2027 first-round pick from Phoenix, a 28 first-round pick, a 2030 first-round pick, and a 2031 swap in the first round, along with Cameron Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Thomas. Just whether or not we think all these players are going to be included or not, like Cam Johnson doesn't seem like he'd be going anywhere. But just when you hear that much being put on the table, potentially, possibly, what's your initial takeaway if you're looking at the Brooklyn Nets and what they would be after that move?
It's too much. My initial takeaway, it's like not even, I don't even have to pause and think about it really. It's too much. And there's a lot of different reasons. Now that package, now, that's just a floated one, right? Like that, we don't know.
Yes.
That's nothing close to official. That's just like, hey, this is like, that's not even sourced. That's just, this would work in the trade machine. This is sort of based around some other trades that have happened in the past regarding players and picks. The salaries match like this way. My biggest concern, I will go through each of these like sort of pieces and why. My biggest concern, well, I have two major concerns with offering a trade package like this for Donovan Mitchell. One is that you better be absolutely sure he's re-signing the second he steps into the door. Like
1,000% sure.
Like beyond sure. Like you have to know that he is re-signing the contract for the long term, the absolute second he walks through the door. You have like, if you don't know that, then we're right back in the Harden Kyrie situation all over. I mean, Harden, better example than Kyrie, but like the Harden situation all over again. It's because he has, it's you have to know this. Mitchell has a player option in 25-26 for $37 million. There's no chance he's picking that up. So he is going to be an unrestricted free agent in 2000. You basically have him for one season under contract unless you just offer the extension. So that's my first hesitancy is, and I know you have all the things in the world, how they're going to resign. Hey, that's what they said about Harden. He didn't resign.
Right.
And they were able to trade him, but kind of barely, right? And he was out the door. If you don't know for sure, this is a lot to give up. That's problem number one. Problem number two, and we've seen this happen so many times, is that you empty the war chest to bring a guy in, and then when it comes to make the team better around that guy, it's so much harder because you've already emptied the war chest for the one guy. And so when you give a list that's just like never-ending picks, never-ending players, what you have to then look at is like, hey, what's left? Like, what's left?
Yeah.
Like Donovan Mitchell, Mikal Bridges, Ben Simmons, and question marks.
Claxton,
like
assuming you sign him back, right? Yeah, Claxton if you bring him back. Okay, like that. That's
I don't
it,
know.
right? And then
and cap space some in 2025, and some of ways to get better, but not tons because again they don't have their own picks, right? So I don't know, man. I get really worried about these situations because this feels like just 2.0 on all the problems the Nets got themselves into the first time around. And it feels fraught with peril, I guess. That's a long answer, but I'm steadfast in this is that it is few and far between the examples that you can find where teams just unload the coffers, empty the coffers here, and it all works out perfectly. It just doesn't really.
Well, by the way, it's few and far between, and also the Nets' track record on doing this.
Well, the Nets' track record is an F- on this,
right? That's what I mean.
So, yeah.
They actually drag down the curve in a lot of ways with this, right? When the Brooklyn Nets make moves like this, it tends to not go their way. Now, that doesn't mean, to your point, hey, we're bringing you in, handshake agreement. He walks in the door, and immediately, the very next day, it's like extension's been signed. Donovan Mitchell's not going anywhere. Okay, great. Even then, I think you and I have still said this time and again. You still then have to tell me what is phase 2 of this plan. And you mentioned having money, whether it's this scenario or otherwise. Hey, listen, you get some money going out, whether it is Dorian Finney-Smith. I think that's reasonable. You want to say you throw in, the Cam Thomas part of this is very interesting because he's on the precipice of being extension eligible as well. So you're thinking about the long term there. But what is this team after? And then what is the next move that you're going to make? Something that probably wouldn't come, you would think, until the following offseason, because if you spend all these assets now for Mitchell, okay, fine. But then you're not going to do the other thing, which is, well, how do we get this Ben Simmons contract off the books so we can make another move? At a certain point here, sending out 6, 7 draft assets to get Mitchell, to clear Ben Simmons, to make the next move. You can see it. It's all over Doug's face if you're watching on YouTube. It's like the agony of putting yourself on the precipice of making another massive franchise setback kind of move, right?
I have two other examples. I have another example, not Nets related of this, that I want to get to in a second, which I think is going to actually hammer it home perfectly. We'll get into that here in a second. First, Tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. Maybe you're into speed. Maybe it's power. Maybe it's style. eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts. For your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. You got eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP. Bring home those huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, so as we continue to roll on the Locked On Nets podcast, talking about the Brian Windhorst report that, yes, the Brooklyn Nets are ready. They have a package in hand. Here we go. However, there are some examples of this not working out for Brooklyn. What's your other follow-up example before we talk a little bit about the Lakers and some other teams maybe that could come into the fray here?
Yeah, the other example is the first time Donovan Mitchell got traded from the Jazz, right? Right? Like, and if you look back at that package, Jazz get Colin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, Ochai Agbaji, who they traded. He's now with Toronto. They get a 2025 first rounder this year, a 2026 pick swap, a 27 first rounder, a 28 pick swap, and a 29 first round pick. And now, 2 years later, they're sending Donovan Mitchell out the door to try to recoup some of those things. I mean, they just did it with this exact guy. Like do you think Cleveland would want to have that package back? Now that they know they're not re-signing Mitchell?
Now that Donovan Mitchell might not be staying in Cleveland? Yeah, right.
Of course. Now, again, I'm putting that through the filter of time and history and knowing the results. But the package that you just outlined is not too dissimilar to the one that Utah literally got. And that just sets Utah up for life. I mean, if Mitchell leaves here and they got a borderline star in Lauri, and they have all these draft picks that now Cleveland's got to go try to claw back to make themselves better around whatever's left. They just did this. And so it's just so difficult. Do you make those trades? And I'll defend the Harden trade forever because it was right at the time. I know I kind of let me laugh at it now because it went bad. That doesn't take away that at the time we were like, of course. You know why? Because it took them from title maybe to title favorite. You you do those packages when you are trying to go from Cleveland. It's hey, we got Mobley and Allen and Garland and that's a first round team. And now we want to get to the Eastern Conference Finals and Mitchell can take us there. That makes sense too. Going from point A to point B on that is when you unload the coffers. The Nets are so far away from that. They're so far. Even the Lakers, it's okay, well, they just lost to Denver in the playoffs. The Nets stunk. They stunk. You're okay, well, maybe it's, I'm sorry, I'm doing all the talking on this one, but maybe you say to yourself, well, in 2025, there's going to be free agents available and we'll have cap space. Okay. You're still telling yourself such a story and you better hope it works out, as opposed to we already have the guys in the door and now we're going for the last piece to put us over the hump. I don't know, man. It's so scary. This team is just not built like these other teams that make these trades. It's nuts.
It's funny, too, that you mentioned about, in 2025, because we've talked about this before, and a lot of people talk about it. Well, in 2025, they'll have more cap space and look at the free agent class. Okay, but we don't know what's going to happen this upcoming season. We don't know what's going to happen at this year's trade deadline. What if some of these teams with some of these impending free agents decide to pull the plug a year early, decide to say, hey, you want to take a chance on re-signing player X? You can go ahead and trade for him now. All of a sudden, that talent pool shrinks a little bit. Or you get there and other teams are ready to make big offers themselves. If Brooklyn makes the big move for Donovan Mitchell now, that means that some other team, whether it is the Lakers we'll talk about, maybe it's the Heat, maybe it's one of these other teams, that means they missed out. So that means that they're still waiting for their guy that they want to go get, right? So it's all of these predictive things that we talk about. Well, you get Donovan Mitchell now, then you clear the Ben Simmons contract, and then you add the superstar. It all sounds so easy on paper. But as you mentioned, even the Harden version of it, okay, that was, quote, so easy. You just went and traded for him, but it didn't work out. So that model you build of, you do this, you do A, then you do B, and it equals C, championship. That
you had two, by the way, you had two top
50 path, but
yeah.
Go ahead.
You had a top 5 and a top 15 guy already in the door. in Katie and Kyrie, right? Like they were already there. They were already there on like the borderline talent that you need to make an all-in move. Again, I'm defending the Harden trade. It did not work out. I mean, it flamed out in a spectacular way. At the time, it was obviously correct. To me, it was so obviously correct to do it, even with knowing how Harden was leaving and like sort of like even the worry around that. It was totally correct. I mean, is there any comparison to where the Nets are now? Like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I strongly believe that if you were to poll GMs across the league and look at the Nets situation, and they were just like, "Hey, what would you do in this situation?" 29 out of the 30 would not do it, and there's one guy who would, and it's Marks, and because he's there. The other 29 guys, I just can't. If they were looking at this situation independently, I don't know how they could talk themselves into it. It's like
Current
it
roster,
feels
current
borderline
assets. Yeah.
It feels borderline
And
insane to me unless you have the craziest of assurances that the rest of the pieces are going to fall into place. If you have those and I don't know about it, then my bad, and I'll apologize for this take. But
no, I think it's a fair reason. It's a fair way to look at this. Now, the other part of it is on the back end of this episode, we're going to talk about from Cleveland's angle and what they're trying to accomplish in this. By the way, it will be interesting that if Donovan Mitchell just ends up being a guy that ends up fetching a dozen draft picks over a handful of seasons, going from Utah to Cleveland to whatever his final destination is.
Sorry, last thing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to interrupt you anymore, but I'll say this last thing. This is not anti-Mitchell. He's awesome. It's not. It's really not about him. He's awesome. It's actually he's so good that it's like the only thing that still has me like, okay, they could do it. They'd actually be an interesting team to watch. It's not really about him. It's not about him at all. It's about where the Nets currently are. It's only about the Nets' current situation.
So the other interesting thing here is we'll talk about Cleveland on the back end, but I wanted to touch on also these other, again, frameworks of these kind of packages. The Lakers were the other team that Windhorst said they're ready to offer a package. And it's always funny because we know they don't have nearly the draft, assets that Brooklyn does to throw into this. But one of the things there's something else that we'll talk about with the Nets. But one of the things for the Lakers or for a lot of teams is we can offer you some value from a player standpoint. Now, whether or not when you look at a team like the Lakers, who let's say their package involves the only couple of first round picks they have in 29, in 2030, may throw a swap in 2031. They get those picks out there, but they can't go as deep into draft picks as the Nets can. So then you're talking about an Austin Reeves. You're maybe talking about a Rui Hachimura. You're talking about a Jalen Hood-Schifino. Likewise, when you go and look over at Miami, okay, Mitchell, that seems like a really great fit. So they can go ahead with a Tyler Hero because he has the contract and the money. They can throw in, Jaime because he is a young player that's shown off a little bit here. They can throw in Nikola Jovic because he's shown off and he's a young talent. That's the other problem here. When you look at some of these other teams, Lakers, we can even just be specific on. They're interesting because I don't think Austin Reeves and, Hood-Schifino really rise to that level. Miami becomes interesting to me because they have young, realized talent. When you wind it back to Brooklyn, it's already been speculated, well, Noah Clowney would be the untouchable asset for the Brooklyn Nets. And it's like, well, what are we talking about here? If somebody comes knocking, the Nets can't offer the same caliber value to Cleveland. Like when you examine Cam Thomas, they can't offer the same player value. If Cleveland's looking at it and saying, yes, we're going to move on from Donovan Mitchell, but we also want to stay competitive. We also want to look at our roster and feel like we can be top 5-ish in the Eastern Conference going forward, which is pretty wide open right now. So I find that part of it pretty interesting. We talk about packages. Picks are great, but they are essentially a chance to get really good talent. Established talent could be more appealing to Cleveland in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, I mean, look, and maybe we're undervaluing Cam Thomas's value in this. Like if he's for sure coming back for like a first, if he's worth multiple first round picks at this point, like it's sometimes a little hard for me to evaluate how other teams see him, like in terms of like their overall schema and like where he fits. And I bet you actually, if we're doing this other, sort of random fake poll of GMs, I believe actually his value.
How are those fake GMs responding to those fake polls that you're asking?
I mean, my guess is that the value for him would be all over the place too. I think there's probably some that would view him really, really high based on his skill set, and there's some that would view him way lower. I think it would depend. That might be like a team by team, front office by front office sort of venture, and that's always a tricky situation too. And so, by the way, so if Cleveland, who I think that someone had said that they had offered a first round pick for him at some point in something, like
Yeah,
and maybe it
going
was part
back,
of the
yeah.
Harden thing or something, but like, if they still valued him really high, then maybe like it is closer to like not having to go all the way on the guy
Mhm.
on Mitchell, right? And so, but that's just always the hard part for me to dive into. So we have a couple other things we want to talk about here,
Sure.
and regarding Mitchell and sort of like where the landscape of the NBA kind of falls with him. We'll get into that here in a second. Want to let you know that this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, we're all carrying around some stressors in our lives. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small. Sometimes we just keep them bottled up, and it's going to really start to affect you pretty negatively. If you're kind of pushing that stuff down, not getting it out, those different stressors, you're going to start feeling it in other ways in your life. This is where BetterHelp can step in. They're going to hook you up with a therapist that's right for you. They're going to match someone that's just like right for the way you want to talk on a sort of day-to-day or week-to-week basis. It's entirely online. It's designed to be really, really convenient, flexible, totally suited to your schedule as well. All you got to do with BetterHelp, you just fill out a brief questionnaire. You get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch anytime, by the way. No additional charge. They want to line you up with someone that's right for you. Like I said, getting those things off your chest, big, small, the different stressors. Don't keep them bottled up. Get stuff off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today. Get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so as we continue the Locked On Nets episode on a Thursday, Brian Windhorst reporting, yes, the Brooklyn Nets are ready. Yes, they have a package in hand. Now, we've given speculative versions of this. I would hope that at least if you're coming in the door with your initial offer, that Sean Marks is not like, hey, man, I got like 4 or 5 first-round picks. I got Cam Thomas. I got a bunch of guys. Like, let's not go ahead and just open the doors and put everything on the table. Play a little coy with it if you're Sean Marks trying to make this deal happen. The other part of this is the Cleveland side of it to me. Now, you mentioned the one thing on the Cam Thomas piece, which I do think is interesting. If he is valued, because there is this world where whether it's that Garland in Cleveland, okay, what does that look like going forward? Would they maybe want to try to turn him into some other value if they move on from Donovan Mitchell? You can reconstruct the entire Cavs core, and maybe Cam Thomas is a part of that. So he looks like a valuable piece. At which point, though, as you noted, if you pull GMs and they say maybe he's worth a first round pick or a little bit more than a first round pick. Well, so now we're talking about 6 first round picks of value plus salary match and speculative offers for Donovan Mitchell. That's a lot. But from a Cleveland side of things, they can offer a nearly $270 million extension for Donovan Mitchell right now. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but players, as almost every human beings have this in them, like money. And they like getting the most money. And if I'm Donovan Mitchell, do I think that it's beyond the pale that he is also just positioning himself to say, I want the extension now. I don't want to make mid 30 million. I don't want to have to worry about the player option a year from now. I am one of the best players in the league. And if you're Cleveland, are you just going to let him walk out the door because he's putting some of this pressure around maybe I don't want to be here? At a minimum this offseason, we are going to hear that Cleveland has extension talks with Donovan Mitchell, and then Donovan Mitchell will have to turn that offer away before we can really ramp up what teams are going to offer to make a trade possible here.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating because, if you're Cleveland, you're still very incentivized to keep him, right? Like you gave away a
Yes.
lot of assets out the door. I get that, they're in a weird spot because like they probably have come to the conclusion here that the Garland and Mitchell thing probably just is not the pairing they wanted it to be. Garland's under contract through 27, 28. I mean, it's hard to like really evaluate him, although it does feel like maybe if they were to redo that contract, it wouldn't be the same for Garland. I mean, his season wasn't amazing. I mean, he had 11 points in the final game here with no with no Levert or Mitchell on 4 for 17. I know it's one game, but it's just like hasn't looked amazing for him based on like the money they have going out. Still think Young can get better. It's not over for him by any stretch, but like they have him under contract for a long time. And so, would they entertain an idea of like trading him out? I don't even know where his value kind of stands right now. I'm sure there would be teams interested in his services. If you're Cleveland, I mean, you have to probably offer it at least, right? I think that it doesn't make sense not to. It's hard to replace guys like him that are this good. And so I just don't know why you wouldn't try. It doesn't feel like any of the tea leaves here suggest that Mitchell has any interest in going back, but I mean, stranger things and all, but I don't know if that I'm kind of like sidewinding the idea here. But I think that in general, I can't imagine if you're Cleveland, you feel too confident about this because there's just been too much buzz around all the other scenarios and they don't involve him going back.
No, you know what? And I can relate it back to Brooklyn, and we know after Harden, they end up trading him. Then they end up moving on from Kyrie. Now, Kevin Durant immediately comes in effectively the next day and is like, okay, I'm all set here. That's fine. But the offseason prior, when he was speculated about, okay, he's going to request out, and that's going to have to make a decision here. Are they going to keep just Kyrie Irving? The conversations behind closed doors are, okay, let's stick with this here. We're going to try to do X, Y, and Z. And then if it's still in the same spot here a year from now, we'll go ahead and we'll revisit it and we'll get you out of here, right? I think if you're Cleveland, you probably go to Mitchell in that same way. It's not just the extension, because when you go on the open market, do not hold me to the exact numbers, but we all know the team that has the player on it has prohibitively better odds in terms of financial ability to retain him in the contracts they can offer. So if Mitchell's going to walk outright into free agency, it's going to look different. This is where the conundrum of, well, if a team trades for me and gives up a lot, I hurt their ability to continue to build around me once I get there. But by getting me, they can then give me the massive contract extension that I also want. So there's those two components from a Mitchell perspective. But if you are Cleveland, you say, okay, Darius Garland makes $36 million on the books. We can turn him into something else here. Like, that's the other part of this. Cleveland does have the ability to say, who do you want? Who's out there on the market? Who's speculated right now that we can go get you? The damaging part for Cleveland, as we've mentioned before, it's a bad free agency class this summer. It's also a weak draft class coming up. So there are these other elements, I think, from a Cleveland perspective, where there's a lot that we could do. The problem is there a player out there that Mitchell would point to and say, hey, if you go get me him and you sign, and I'll sign the extension, and then you go trade for him, I'll stick around and we'll see how it plays itself out. I just don't know if Cleveland has the appetite, like we're talking about with Brooklyn. Do they have the appetite to take that risk, to go all in on a move like that? And then even a year later, because the other part real quick is Mitchell signs the extension, but a year after that, he goes, yeah, it still didn't work out. I still want to be traded, right? There's no safeguard against a player wanting to be out even after the extension. And that contract's still going to be fine for any team to come get, even if he's making north of $50 million a year.
Nah, this is why they're gonna move on from Mitchell for sure. Because like, even if you look at like the way the rest of things line up, you have Garland, who's 24 all the way through 27, 28, right? You have Mobley, who's due an extension next year, and he's 22. So you kind of like soft rebuild around Garland and Mobley. Maybe trade Jared Allen, because like the fit there is, you trade Jared Allen, you trade Donovan Mitchell, and you go back to Garland and Mobley and you say, you guys are young. We'll get something for Allen. We'll get something for Mitchell. We're gonna have a ton of. We'll get back, basically claw back all the stuff that we gave up for Mitchell, and we'll have ways that we can like kind of build around you and Darius Garland. You'll be our point guard of the future. That's such an easier story to tell based on what's already there and their ages than the Mitchell thing. This is why he's like gone. It's just a matter of who's gonna step in for the bidding. I don't think. I'm resolute on that. He's gonna be gone. It's just like what team he makes most sense for. I don't think Cleveland should tell themselves any other stories around that. And it's a shame. Like, they tried. I appreciate the effort, but it's like, it just is not going to work. But they have a good chance to kind of claw some of it back, and they're almost for sure going to.
Interestingly enough, Windhorst also mentioned when he was discussing this, I can't remember who was on the panel with him, said, "Oh, what about the Knicks?" And they said, "Well, they're trying to win a playoff series right now, but the other team in New York, Brooklyn, they could make a push for this. A team like New York is very much, the Knicks are very much the other team here. They lose in the conference finals. They tell themselves, they don't have to tell themselves a hard story. Bring in Donovan Mitchell and pair him with Jalen Brunson, and all of a sudden we are Eastern Conference Finals, going to the finals contenders next season. So there are teams that I think have higher aspirations, or that see the needle move significantly more by bringing in Donovan Mitchell. At the end of the day, to close out on this, when you look at those packages, you even mentioned Jared Allen there. What is your ideal version within reason? What's your ideal version of how much you would give up for Donovan Mitchell to get him to Brooklyn?
I mean, it's not realistic, but
like,
Cam Thomas and 2 picks. I mean, and have to find a way to match the money, like Cam, or Simmons and 3 picks. I don't know. Even Simmons, though, like, he comes off the books in a year, and I don't know, just ride it out at this point. And so, look, there's a world where there's definitely a sweet spot here, right? The Nets have 10 picks to trade, right? So like, trading some picks is not the end of the world. And maybe you're like, okay, well, we don't want to get rid of Simmons to trade him for negative value because he's just going to come off the books and we'll be good to go. And I would trade Cam Thomas if you thought Cam Thomas had really good value and he really can't pair with Mitchell anyway. Like, then sure, right? Then Cam Thomas, DFS to match the money. I think they need a little bit more. Maybe Cam, or even Cam Johnson. And I'm not in the trade machine right now. Like something like that and a couple picks. I don't know. Maybe it's just not the end of the world. And they're just a more exciting team. And I think it's and they still have more picks and they'll have some cap space. I think there is a world where it's just kind of fine. It's just like if they get in a bidding war, I just can't imagine how that ends up being the case. But, come back here, 2 players, 2 picks. That seems okay for a guy Mitchell, and he's awesome. Maybe more. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know people in the comments are going to probably say, "Oh, he's so much more," or whatever. But I think
but that's all projected value, and it's also projected contracts that are coming up. Cam Thomas is going to be extension eligible. I like the idea because you know me, I never shy away from throwing out ideas. But you mentioned about Jared Allen. Maybe you move on from him. Listen, you want to tell me that it takes more picks into the system to make it happen? Whether it's that you're not going to bring back Nicholas Claxton or you want to do a sign and trade, whatever that looks like, you can sit here and tell yourself a story about Ben Simmons and Cam Thomas, along with, let's say, 3 picks instead of 2, like you mentioned. Maybe it's 4 picks instead of 3. You get Jared Allen and Donovan Mitchell back in the door for the Brooklyn Nets and end up getting not only a guy that you drafted once upon a time, but also that stretch big that can shoot from the outside a little bit. Like, I think if there's an all-in kind of move here going for Mitchell, I would be looking over that roster in its entirety and selling myself on, yeah, you know what? All the draft picks are open. All of our players are open. And we want to get back the best version of this team in keeping Mikal Bridges, maybe probably if we're talking about realistically keeping Cam Johnson because that's what the Nets want to do. How do we make this team where you walk in the door doing nothing else this upcoming season and say, we're ready to compete. We're ready to be a top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. I think that should be a big part of what Sean Marks tries to accomplish in a 1-to-1 Cleveland to Brooklyn trade and not start having to go down. Well, now step number 2, step number 3, now wait another year. There is a part of me that if you're going to go for Mitchell, I get a little antsy about the now wait until next summer. And that's when the action really happens. That's the part of it I actually think that probably makes me apprehensive the most is the wait and see for phase 2 TBD.
Easily the worst part of it, like that, and that's why we opened with like telling about the reservations around that piece of it. It's like it's not knowing is the biggest part, and sometimes look, you got to take risks to kind of swing big here. I get it, but it just feels like there's just too many unknowns. All right, we're gonna get out of here. Much appreciate everyone who's rocking with us through the off season. We are off season for the Nets, postseason for good teams. But make sure you subscribe over on YouTube, or make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen.
Trust me, Wilbur. People are very gullible. They'll believe anything they see in print. That is Charlotte from Charlotte's Web.
Oh, my wife, I'm reading that with my daughter right now. There you go.
What a story.
Little plucky upstart. All right, we're gonna be and one of the all-time great poets. We're gonna be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Yeah.